those things, today's video is definitely not for you, and I would highly encourage you to click away and pick a different video. With that said, we are going to get into it, and I'm going to be telling you about the terrifying Nutty Putty cave disaster. So, cave exploring, which is also referred to as spelunking, really is an extreme sport that is reserved for those willing to take extreme risk. Now, while preparedness and experience can of course readily offset its dangers, I would say that it is a risk that most of us are fine with never undertaking. I would argue that these places, which are hundreds of feet below the Earth's surface, really are what claustrophobic nightmares are made of. Just before Thanksgiving in 2009, a young medical student named John Edward Jones traveled home to Stansbury Park, Utah to spend time with his family for the holidays. As a boy, John often went spelunking with his family, so this sport was not new to him. Although he really hadn't been in years, John and 10 others decided to go out one night and explore Nutty Putty, a caving system that was southwest of Utah. The unusual name of this hydrothermal cave comes from the soft brown clay that is found within many of its tunnels. The first man to explore the cave, named Dale Green, compared this clay to Nutty Putty, which was the original name for Silly Putty. On November 24th, at roughly 8 o'clock p.m., the group entered the Nutty Putty cave, and they began spelunking through an area called the Big Slide. Now, this was the largest room in the cave, and it was very, very close to the entrance. An hour into the expedition, John, his brother, and 2 other friends broke off from the larger group. They wanted to go and explore a narrower, more advanced area of the cave called the Birth Canal, and this area definitely lived up to its name because of how narrow it was to pass through. Now, like many caves, this passageway required cavers to crawl through a very small tunnel, which would eventually open up to a larger room, allowing cavers to turn around and exit. The group of 4 separated, and they each went to go and find the entrance to the Birth Canal. And shortly after this, John found a very, very small opening, which he believed was the correct entrance. He entered a tiny hole, and this hole was no larger than the opening of a front-loading washing machine, and he entered the passageway head first. So, from everything that I've been reading, going into a very small, especially unmapped passageway head first is something that is just not recommended for cavers. And the reason for this is because if you go into an unmapped passageway, you don't know if there is going to be enough room for you to turn around and get out. So if you go into a passageway head first, it makes it much more difficult to get out if you do get stuck. Without the full use of your feet and your legs, it's very difficult to back out, his hips and fingers. There was literally no room for him to use his arms to pull himself forwards. And that also meant there was no movement or ability for him to move himself backwards and out of the tunnel. And it really did not take him very long to realize that entering this passageway was a grave mistake. John had accidentally entered an area near to the birth canal, but it wasn't the correct passageway. He had entered what was actually called Ed's Bush, but by the time he realized this mistake, it was too late. Ed's Bush is made up of passageways that are simply too small for humans to navigate, especially a full-grown man like John, who stood 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds. And the tunnel that he was in did not lead to a larger room. Completely unable to back out the way that he had come in, all John could do was continue forward, hoping that he would eventually come to an area with enough space for him to turn around and exit. So he continued forwards, going about 135 feet, and he eventually came to a sharp downward fissure that actually led to a very tiny and unmapped tunnel below him. The tunnel in the fissure below him may have appeared to widen out, and it's believed that it may have looked like this to John simply due to reflections from his headlamp. But whatever the case, John believed that this tunnel would have enough room for him to turn around. And unfortunately, this was literally his only option at this point. His only option was to enter this fissure. In order to squeeze his head and chest into this drop, John had to get over a solid lip of rock that jutted out inside of the hole. And to do so, he had to exhale, compressing his chest in order to squeeze himself past this lip. If his chest had been expanded, there was literally not enough room to get over it. Once he was in the fissure, he obviously breathed again, expanding his chest, and this was when he became stuck. The simple act of breathing and expanding his chest got him stuck inside the unforgivable walls of this shrinking passageway. John was now trapped. He was nearly upside down on a decline of 70 degrees, and in his tight downward position, he actually had zero mobility to back himself off of the fissure. Now, just to give you a little more detail, the hole that he was in measured only 10 by 18 inches. John struggled to free himself by moving forward, but the tunnel only grew smaller and smaller. Tragically, he managed to move further into the narrowing space, trapping himself even worse. His left arm became pinned under his left shoulder, while his right arm was pinned backwards, giving him no ability to push himself backwards off of the lip. And when his party realized that John was having trouble, his younger brother Josh followed him into the Ed's Bush tunnel. He himself got stuck in an area of the tunnel called the corkscrew, but he managed to free himself and get to his brother. Here, Josh realized how dire his brother's situation was. All he could see were John's running shoes and his ankles, the fissure having completely engulfed the rest of him. Seeing his Josh had entered the cramped tunnel feet first, so he wrapped his legs around John's calves and he pulled as much as the confined space would allow him to. He managed to pull him about 1 inch out of the fissure, but with the 70-degree angle that he was on and the fact that John's arms were pinned, he was literally unable to hold himself up or assist in any way. John was completely dead weight. His arms and exposed calves were useless, and he simply slid back into the hole as soon as Josh let go. Needing professional help, Josh quickly exited the cave to go and alert rescue workers, and he asked a friend to enter the tunnel so John wouldn't have to be there, stuck and alone. The friend that went in to comfort John would absolutely panic due to the sheer tightness of this tunnel, and they could only spend an hour with John inside before they had to exit and swap places with Josh when he returned. When Utah County Search and Rescue arrived to Nutty Putty, it took them about 30 minutes to get down and reach the tunnel. Small-statured rescuer Susie Matola was the first to enter the tunnel. Only 5'3", the passageway was cramped even for her, and she couldn't fully extend her arms as she made her way into John. When she finally reached him, she simply said, "Hi John, my name is Susie. How's it going?" John replied with, "Hi Susie, thanks for coming, but I really want to get out." "Oh, no worries, John. We're gonna have you out of here, lickety-split." And it's so sad because rescuers really did believe that they were going to be able to free him. They had even rescued cavers before from this same passageway, and they were confident in their ability to do it again. But Susie, like Josh, quickly realized that this was a much more serious situation, and it was much different from their previous rescues. All she could see were John's ankles and feet, the rest of him completely encased by rock. Simply pulling John out was not going to be an easy feat. While he did have a small amount of wiggle room, the problem was that his ribs were actually trapped on the 90-degree lip of rock. The lip of rock was essentially acting like a fish hook, trapping him in place. The low ceiling clearance made it nearly impossible to simply pull John straight back, as his feet and legs were going to get in the way. Rescuers knew quickly that his legs may have to be broken in order to pull him out. But the worst part was that John was now physically running out of time. He had now been trapped upside down for nearly 3 hours. So, humans are designed to be upright, right? And being upside down for long periods of time is extremely stressful on our systems. Our hearts are meant to pump blood down to the rest of our body, but in his position, John's heart was receiving more blood than the organ could handle at one time. And during long periods of inversion, the heart will struggle to maintain blood pressure due to this overload. Eventually, it will be unable to move blood around the body properly. Blood will also begin pooling in the skull, where our systems now have to continually pump it out against gravity. And again, our bodies are not meant to do this for long periods of time. In addition, John's organs were now pressing down on circulation from his downward position. John was in immense pain during this process. At one point, his feet touched the ceiling of the tunnel and he screamed from the contact. Rescuers had to constantly stop to give him a break, but with each pull, they did manage to get him out of the hole little by little, finally freeing him from the lip of rock that he had been trapped on. They pulled him out until finally the rescuer closest to him was able to make eye contact. John was in pain. He was scared. His eyes were bloodshot, but he still managed to be in good spirits. John said, "It sucks. I'm upside down. I can't believe I'm upside down. My legs are killing me." Rescuers almost had him out, and one more good pull should have done it. However, as the team of 8 pulled that one last time, that was when disaster struck. The pulley system failed when an archway holding one of the bolts shattered. Rescuers said they felt the rope go loose. They fell backwards, and John slid back into the hole that they had just rescued him from. Only this time, he fell even further in. Rescuers quickly scrambled to drill another hole for the pulley system, but by the time they were ready to try pulling him out again, John had become unresponsive. At this point, he had been trapped for 27 hours. At midnight on November 25th, a medical professional crawled into the tight space where John lay and pronounced him dead. 26-year-old John Edward Jones left behind his wife, Emily, their young daughter, and a baby boy on the way, who Emily would name John. After his death, authorities deemed retrieving his body simply much too risky. Nutty Putty was closed to the public for good after this tragedy, and eventually the entrance was filled in